Good morning, everyone. Hope that. Oh, we have a clicker. Wonderful. It's just like mine. So I'm going to have some helpers here. We'll get to that in just a moment. But as you can see from the title, this talk is called A Tale of Two Postmortems. And we talked about depth of knowledge. We want to go through depth of knowledge and understanding how to learn from our incidents and how to learn from our outages. There's been a great hunger and a desire lately to dive into this sort of thing. And I'm going to be pulling in some principles from certain fields of study like human factors and ergonomics and safety science and resilience engineering and other things like that, where we can take some learnings from other complex system and complex industries and integrate them. So it all starts with a question, which is, why do we do postmortems? What is the point of them? The definition I'm going to be using here, when I say postmortem, I mean the same thing as you might understand to be a debriefing or a post-incident review or a retrospective or an RCA. I realize the Venn diagram of these things may not be exactly the same in your organization, but just to kind of approximate an understanding, we're going to use the term postmortem. It's not even my favorite term, but it's the one we're sticking with for today. When we, after an incident, after an outage, we go through and we're trying to study what happened. What we're going to do is we're going to have the closest approximation of a live demo you can have for this sort of thing, which is why I have my helpers here. Can you test your microphones, make sure they work?
Hello.
Good. Hopefully we're good on the camera there. But we're going to walk through a caricature of a postmortem. We're going to compare two different methods of doing postmortems. Again, this first one's a caricature. I'm not saying anyone does postmortems like this, and yes, expect it to be a little bit awkward. But I'm trying to draw some contrast in here. Keep in mind also that the point is not to tell you this is the way you should or shouldn't do things. It's to have us think a little more deeply on why we do what we do. So with that said, let's get started with postmortem example number 1 from Potato Systems.
Hi, I'm Vasvi, and I'm the on-call engineer for the service.
Hi, I'm Regina, and I'm a senior engineer on the team. I built a lot of the system.
Hi, I'm Badrinath. I'm the team lead. So, all right, we are here for incident 2042, right? Let's see, I have got the postmortem right up here. Vasavi, you did this one, right?
Yes, I was the on-call for this one.
So, why did it go down?
We had changed some of the deployment automation, so when a deployment failed and I manually deleted it, it assumed that it needed to repave the whole potato batch rather than just the one that failed.
Did you not test the automation?
We did the testing, I just didn't think of this specific scenario.
Okay, we can't have any manual deletion happening. It's too easy to make mistakes. If we had automated this scenario, we would have avoided this incident totally. Do you have an action item to make it automated?
This is a script you can use to decommission a patch, but nothing for just straight deleting and retrying, I don't think.
I'll put one on.
In the meantime, make sure you update the ROM book too, so there's clear guidance on to not do a manual delete if deployment fail in this way. Let the script handle it.
What part of the runbook should I put that in?
For the biggest alert that failed, and also for the deployment failure ROM book.
How and when we discovered this issue?
We had alerts fired as soon as the first deployment failed.
That was like 7-ish?
That's right.
So, but didn't you join until around like 7:45? Why not?
Correct. It wasn't until I logged in and Vasvi pinged me to ask for help.
This kills our mitigation time. We got to jump into the call sooner.
The first alert that fired was noisy. I didn't know about the issues until after the deployment had failed. And I went to check the logs.
Noisy or not, when we get any alert, we need to acknowledge and react. Our metrics are pretty red. When we get through this, we will fix those noisy alerts. In the meantime, can we put something in the system so that this particular scenario is covered?
I mean, yes, I can probably put something together that correlates a couple different alerts.
Excellent. Let's log this as an item of action. Anyways, let's look at the root cause analysis. What went wrong here?
Well, the category we picked is human error due to the manual deletion. That's on me. I'm sorry.
So glad that it didn't go much worse. Regina, do you cover this sort of things in the training?
I thought I did, but I guess we need to go over it again.
Let's add this to the repair items. Update the on-call training.
Should we be letting engineers touch that at all, though? I mean, it wouldn't break as often if it was automated, right?
I agree. That's why I mentioned that automation item earlier. It seems to be the usual culprit. So update the alerting, update the runbook, automate the process so the engineers can't mess it up.
Okay.
All right, I'll do that then. Is there anything else?
I have a hot stop. Need to get to next meeting. So just make sure that we got the repairs. Doesn't happen again. So monitoring, training, update the patch. These are the things.
Of course.
Bye.
Okay, so that I saw some grimaces at certain lines that we heard here, and probably for good reason. So what did we see here? What are some of the themes that come up in this sort of, again, caricature of a postmortem? Some of the things that happen when we're trying to figure out what happened and how to make our systems better. Well, one was human error. You may have heard this mentioned in other talks, but when you talk about human error, you're kind of reaching an analytical dead end. Usually when you classify something as, oh, the human messed up, that was the cause, you're stopping right when you should be starting your investigation, right? Look into what makes it likely that human errors will happen. We are all humans, thus we will all eventually misspell something or misclick something, and just expecting people to never do that ever is unrealistic. Secondly is counterfactuals. It's very tempting when we get into, in these postmortem meetings, to talk about things that didn't happen, right? To talk about a parallel universe, right? The example would be, well, if we'd done X, then Y wouldn't have happened. That's true, but that's not what happened. That's not the reality here. If Franz Ferdinand had not been shot, World War I would not have happened. Is that a meaningful line of conversation? Not necessarily. The next thing would be normative language, where you just assume something was a bad idea. It's a mixture of hindsight bias, where because you know what happens, you know what was a good idea and what was not, even though the people in the moment may not have known, and it's blameful. And then there's mechanistic reasoning. This one, I understand why we have this desire and this belief that if we just automate things, they will be more reliable than if the humans use them. But that's not necessarily the case. And an automated system can break even if you don't touch it. And so just assuming that because humans are involved, it's worse is not necessarily the case. So in the example of this system, what's going to happen next? Right, they're going to file some repairs, some additional monitoring, additional lines in the runbook. Who knows how much monitoring there is and how many runbook lines there are. Perhaps a point fix for that specific failure mode, some updates to the training, and perhaps they'll file an aspirational, deeper fix, but will it get the attention it needs? It kind of depends. Oftentimes these things get filed away, but they never get the funding they need, right? How many repairs after they're filed actually get completed in your organization? And of the ones you do, how many of them actually make a difference? How many of them make it better? Or do you just do them to get them out of the backlog? And so again, why do we do postmortems? What is the point? I'm going to share a little bit of Professor Sidney Decker's thoughts on the matter. He has a couple classifications of reasons why we do accident investigations or postmortems or debriefings. The first is epistemological. It's to find out what happened, just to establish the facts. Secondly is preventative, which is kind of how we tend to pitch it, is to find ways to prevent the thing from happening. Then there's these other two, which we don't talk about a lot, but is moral, tracing the transgressions that were committed, perceived or real, and reinforcing moral and regulatory boundaries, right? Sometimes it's a desire to respect or enforce the power structures that exist. And I'm not going to get into that too far afield, but just keep in mind that when we talk about accident investigations or postmortems, this is kind of one of the desires people have sometimes. And the fourth is existential, which is just finding an explanation for the suffering that occurred, right? Suffering on the part of your customers, suffering on the part of your on-call engineers, suffering on the part of the people whose lives are going to be harder next week because they have to change their work based on the outage that happened. And so sometimes when we're doing a postmortem, we're just trying to find some explanation that helps us feel a little bit better about how awful that thing was. And these four things are valid. But I want you to keep them in mind. And when you're driving towards something like prevention or understanding your system better, keep in mind that there's also the tension in these other things, because these 4 things I mentioned, they can contradict, right? If you need to find someone to blame, then it's going to be harder to learn more about your system or be more preventative, et cetera. In reality, outages are an opportunity to learn. They already happened. Part of the idea of chaos engineering was you poke at your system and then you get extra data about how it behaves under different stressors. When you have an outage, you just got a big stressor and hopefully you got lots of data out of it. So it's an opportunity to learn how your system works, what it's good at, what it's bad at, things you thought you knew about your system but you don't actually. But we need to seize the opportunity to learn. And it also helps put empirical data in context. Sometimes we want to look at just the numbers and just the counters and just the logs. But if you do postmortems the way I'm going to show in a little bit, it can help put all these numbers in context. Why are these timeouts happening? Why are we sensitive at this point? So on and so forth. So briefly, a couple things about complex systems, because we're going to be talking about them a lot over the next 3 days. Some principles that come from complex systems science are, firstly, that complex systems have many interacting parts. That's more or less their definition. Secondly, is that they have emergent behavior, right? This is behavior that arises from the interactions between components. If you want to know what went wrong, just looking at component A, B, and C and finding out which one broke isn't necessarily the case. Component A, B, and C might all be working just fine, but the way they interact is what breaks the system. The more complex your system is, the more emergent behavior matters. Additionally, tangled causality. When you have lots of interdependencies, you can't point to a single root cause, if ever you could, because there's a million different things interacting and thus influencing the final result. And then also the problem of induction. You might have heard this as kind of the white swan issue, which is if you've only ever seen white swans, can you prove that there is no such thing as a black swan? You can't. And in fact, all you need to do is find one black swan to disprove the hypothesis. And so you might think you know things about your system. It's like, oh, it'll never go over this threshold because it never has in the past. Can you actually guarantee that? No. And the curse of dimensionality. For those who work with big data, a curse is exactly the right word for it. The more variables you have, the more interacting components, the harder it is to predict anything about the system. It just becomes computationally intractable after a while. So let's get into approach number 2 here. It's a human factors inspired approach from all of those different disciplines I mentioned. And again, please don't take this as the one true way to do things, but think about your own systems, the way you do postmortems, and see if there's things you like or things you can learn, and try and notice what's focused on and what lines of conversation happen that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So we're going to get into that with postmortem number 2. And for that, we have initially some interviews. They should be like 5 to 10 minutes long interviews with that a facilitator, a neutral third-party facilitator would have with the engineers before the big meeting together, so that nobody's opinions or ideas get smothered by the group setting. So we're going to go over one of those really briefly, where I, as the facilitator, will talk to one of the engineers. Let me pull up my script here. Okay, so we're going to be interviewing Basti here. How are you today?
Not bad. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for taking some time out of your day. I know you have other work to do. I just wanted to touch base really quick about the outage that happened the other day.
The replanting issue?
Yeah, the one that happened Monday morning.
Yes.
So I'd just like to kind of hear you describe what happened as you remember it. What stood out to you, how you felt, all of that. And in fact, start with how the day had been going beforehand, if you don't mind. The point's to just get your perspective and the timeline as you remember it. No judgment, no root cause, no anything. Just how you experienced the incident.
Okay, how about I start with the previous week, actually. There was some broken automation for automation and also for new potato patch deployments. Last week, I spent a lot of time doing manual button pushing. I helped put in the fix on Friday, but didn't want to deploy it until Monday.
So how were you feeling on Monday then?
A bit stressed, honestly. Mostly bored, though, as I was working through the deployment early Monday morning.
I see. So you were hands-on at the time.
Well, sort of. This rebuild processor has a lot of mindless button pushing and long completion times. So I was sort of babysitting it just like I had the week before with other parts of the system.
When did you know something wasn't quite right?
When the rebuild failed, I went and checked the logs in our field plowing tool, then messaged Regina for help. We looked at it together and found there was something wrong with the secrets. We needed to put something together to rotate back the right version to fix it. Afterwards, I made a little wiki entry so that other engineers could programmatically restart the process next time.
Okay, we won't go through the whole interview here. I'm just trying to give you a taste of things. But are you starting to get the picture a little bit? There's a couple important details she mentioned that wouldn't have come out in the other interview. Things about how the week and the system had been going previously, and the morale and the mental health of the on-call engineers at the time. Let's do one more with our senior engineer. Go ahead and tell me about the time leading up to the outage, starting with any background information you feel is relevant, and then just walking through the timeline as you experienced it.
So it had been a really noisy weekend. I got woken up every night with a few one potato unhealthy alerts. This sort of thing tend to get resolved and not affect the customer, but they wake you up anyway.
So how are you feeling going into the work week then?
A bit stressed and tired. Even on the day of the incident, I didn't make much of the regional alerts I was seeing, as they have a low probability of being serious. Only when I saw a global QoS alert did I realize something must actually be wrong.
Is that how you got involved?
No, actually. Vasvi messaged me. I didn't get any notifications on my phone with the new on-call tooling. So I didn't know anything was going on until I was sitting at my laptop. Then I logged in and I saw the global QoS alert.
Interesting. How long has that been a concern?
Probably since we switched our tooling 2 months ago. I can't install it on my phone, so if I'm not sitting in front of a computer, I don't get these messages. It's not as much a problem when I'm primary because the system will call me if there's a major alert. But if someone pings me, I'm not going to know.
So Regina is the most senior engineer on the team, and she knows the system best. We just heard something that exposes the team's dependence on her. And it's important to hear these different perspectives. When we walk through the interviews first, we reduce the risk of everyone converging to a timeline they didn't actually experience, right? The narrative that ends up in the document is not what any one person remembers, but some sort of Frankenstein monster combination. And so we wouldn't have known about the on-call tooling concern, or that the team kind of stalls out if they can't reach Regina, even though she's not on call. So if we get into the general incident review, I will have gone through the interviews. I will have studied the timeline beforehand as a third neutral party that's not on their team, but who's taken the time to study their system a little bit. I have notes, and I have brought along my invisible note taker, Jeb, who they will point to. I was going to bring like a stuffed duck or something, but so that I can focus on facilitating the meeting rather than jotting things down. Some of my goals are going to be psychological safety, that everyone feels comfortable sharing their insights, because anything that limits information flow is bad for the system, including fear of speaking up. So I'll try and set down a working agreement for the meeting and about the way we'll discuss things, and the goal is to maximize information flow, and in the service of that, make everyone feel comfortable sharing. You need to be able to trust one another to do effective postmortems, and that takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. With that said, let's get into it. All right, everyone, thanks for coming. We're here to discuss Incident 2042, which took place on Monday. As a somewhat neutral third party, I'll be facilitating. Before we get rolling, I want to lay out the agenda and set some ground rules. First, the objective of this meeting is not to prevent this specific incident in the future. Remember that one. It's to learn from what happened. The incident happened, and incidents of some kind will happen again. Let's take this opportunity to learn about our system, about our incident management process, and about ourselves. Even if we end up with 0 remediation items filed when we're done, unlikely, I want us to feel like the discussion was valuable anyway, and that we learned valuable things about the system and our work. Second, we're going to walk through the event and recreate the timeline as a group in the first part of this meeting. Everyone's invited to speak up about details you remember, but please focus on what did happen, not what didn't happen. I'll try to make sure everyone gets a chance to speak, but please let me know if you have something to share, and please be considerate of others. Third, let's focus on being blameless. We're going to assume something called local rationality today. That means we're going to assume that everyone's decisions made perfect sense to them at the time. Even if when we're doing our review later, why did you do that? We're going to assume that in the moment, it made sense and it was the perfect thing to do. And we're going to dive into why it made perfect sense to them, because that's where the real learnings are. So to that end, we're going to focus on using terms like how, not terms like why, wherever possible. I've got Jeb along with me. He'll be taking notes. Does anyone have any questions before we begin?
Is Jeb keeping track of action items?
I'm glad you asked that. Actually. We're not going to focus on repair items, remediation or action items until the very end of the meeting. The point at the beginning is just to establish the timeline. It's very tempting, but we need to get step by step through what actually happened and see what we learn. Remediation items are important though, so I would ask that you write them down, and that when we get to the end of the meeting, we can kind of brainstorm them all together. But don't worry about it right now.
I see, thanks.
Okay, Basvi, let's start with you since I believe you were the first person involved.
Yes, I was working on the rollout that failed.
Actually, could you start about talking about how the system was behaving last week? So here I'm starting to direct the discussion to things I picked up from the interviews, and I'm going to guide the conversation to make sure we hit various important points. They'll draw their own conclusions and hopefully have their own discussions, but there's topics I want to make sure they get covered that might not otherwise. And as they discuss, something like this may happen.
So what I'm hearing is that we got some really noisy alerts.
The global QoS alert is pretty reliable, but the others are sort of 50-50.
And they were waking you up all weekends?
Not every weekend, but often enough.
They're pretty bad.
Let's turn some of these off then. Can we get that as an action item?
That's not a bad idea, but let's not get to action items just yet. Can you make a note of it, and we'll talk about it near the end?
Yeah, I can do that.
Thanks. So, so ideas are being generated, which is good, but we're keeping the focus on the timeline first. Here's another quick snippet.
So then I jumped in and started helping Vasvi redeploy the correct certificates.
Why did you spend so much time on rolling back the certificates? Were they needed for mitigation?
Okay. Let me step in here. Can you find a way to phrase that without using why or you? Assume it made sense to them at the time, and maybe we'll learn something. It might feel awkward to try and rephrase it, but let's give it a try.
Okay, let's see. Rolling back the certificates seemed to be a priority. Can you tell me more about that?
That was a little better.
Yes, so I remembered a case from 2 weeks ago where we had cert issues that blocked control plane access completely. I thought it might be similar to that, but, well, it turned out not to be.
So you know we are probably still vulnerable to that failure mode. Let's talk about that later.
Okay, so something that could have been blameful and made Vasvi feel small or stupid was turned into a healthy, more honest discussion. Also, it reminded the team lead of a vulnerability in the system unearthed by a completely different incident that had kind of just fallen by the wayside. Generally speaking, if people in the room are learning new things about the system, the meeting's going well, even if it's not about that incident in particular. All right, is there anything missing, or maybe does anyone remember anything we talked about differently? Multiple perspectives are good here.
I just wanted to emphasize that last week was rough.
For both of us. You had all those deployments and the automation fix and all of that, and I didn't sleep well all week.
So what I'm hearing is that our pace is unsustainable. I can't promise anything, but I'll talk to the stakeholders and management and see what I can do. Mental health is key here. I'm on call this week, so I will make a note of most of the useless alerts, and maybe we can start getting smarter about when we alert and when we don't alert.
Right, so briefly, I'm locked out here, so I can't switch the slides. But we don't need to do that yet. So this is good. You're leading into the next section. Now we've gotten through the timeline. What did you learn from it? Did you learn anything interesting as we walk through? What other context can we add? Live demos, am I right? Remember, though, these are things you learned, not action items. We're still not to action items.
It's hard to not to jump to action items.
Still not able to switch slides here. Let's see. Doop. There we go. Yeah, I know it's hard not to jump to action items, but we need to hold off for now. We're building a list, and then those ideas need to soak a bit before the team commits to them. So learnings.
I'm worried that we maybe are moving too fast on the automation. We do need to automate our patch planning process, and it's really complicated. But we are deploying things that aren't ready yet.
Well, we are being pressurized pretty hard to do that, Dan. There is high risk of typing in the wrong thing or pressing the wrong button with the current process.
Yes, but when the automation breaks, it's even worse than before. I don't really understand the parts I didn't write myself. I haven't had time to learn how it works.
Right, so this is getting into a deeper discussion, one that maybe the team can't resolve in one meeting. However, they've been respectful to one another, and they're now discussing it more openly, and as a team, they can now work towards a good compromise, right? These things that would otherwise just be an elephant in the room as people burn out or suffer or other things. It wouldn't have been possible if they hadn't talked about it, and they can't talk about it if they don't trust each other. So in the interest of time, we're going to cut off the rest of the script. But thank you so much. Can you give them a round of applause for helping out?
Thanks, guys.
And I'll go put away the microphones, but then I'll drag them back up here. So some of the things we can think about in postmortem meetings, rather than just how do we try to prevent this next time, is what are our system's weaknesses, right? What are the vulnerabilities? What are our strengths, right? Regina, for example, is a really smart engineer. How can we transfer that expertise to other members on the team or make her life easier so that she can better facilitate for us? Who are our experts and how do we preserve and multiply that expertise? And also importantly, what makes things hard? Apparently the on-call tooling was hard for this team. Noisy alerts make things hard, etc. Do these come up in your meetings? What can you do to foster these sorts of conversations? And how well does your system endure this list of things? If it doesn't like one of these things, your system probably doesn't like all of them. We could call this fragility or the or entropy family of issues, right? So think about these when you're studying your system. This is a good way to look at and assess your system's health. I see lots of cameras, so I'll wait for a minute. Okay, the slides will be online though. So, what can I do on Monday? Right, these are suggestions for you, not homework. First is you can study complex systems. There's a lot of deep research on this from various schools of thought. I'm not sending you to just one temple of learning per se, but there's an active research community trying to understand complex systems, how they fail, how they work well, and how to learn from failures. There's also guides, and there's people in the industry who have done a good job. A lot of the facilitation example I gave was derived from this debriefing facilitation guide, which was created in Etsy several years ago. And it's available publicly online also. Here's some resources. Also, if you want to learn more about resilience engineering, which is kind of a lot of this space, that's those 3 bullet points. And if you want to learn more about complexity, emergence, interdependence, feedback, the sort of things you can learn with cellular automata, lots of other cool stuff. The New England Complex Systems Institute has some great resources there. So I'll return to the question again, and I just hope that we can think on this a little bit deeply throughout this conference. There are going to be more than one talk that covers this topic, but what do you want from your postmortems? What do you want to know about your system? And when I say system, I'm not just talking about the software. I'm talking about the hardware and the software and the humans who build and run it. Because if you're not factoring in the humans that build and run the system, you're not actually looking at the whole system. And I would ask and invite you to invest in learning from outages. If you do it this way, great. If you do it some other way, just invest. It's a treasure trove of data. Invest in learning about your systems every day, even when it's not through outages. And importantly, invest in your people. Be a team together. Because the only reason any of this stuff stays up is because of the sorts of humans that are in this room right now, right? You are the reason that the systems work on a good day, and you're the reason it recovers on a bad day. We need to invest in each other and be able to rely on each other. So, my name is Tanner Lund, and this has been A Tale of Two Postmortems. And if we can get another applause for my 3 helpers here. Lasvi and Regina, and where are you? There you are, also stand. Bathri, yeah. From LinkedIn and Microsoft Sydney. Okay. I don't know if we have much more time for Q&A or if we'll just go to the next one. I think we're about done. But thanks.